Okay, let's dive into this investigation. We're surrounded by life, but have you ever just stopped and wondered, what is the one single thing that separates something that's alive from something that's not? What's the real fundamental sign of life?
I mean, look at these. We instinctively just know a running dog is alive. We look at a green plant and we assume it is too. And even a sleeping person who's totally still is obviously alive. But what's the one piece of evidence, the one single sign that connects all of them? Let's figure this out.
For most of us, the first thing that jumps to mind is movement. It's the obvious answer, right? You see a cow chewing, a person shouting, a dog running. It's just common sense. Movement seems like the most basic evidence for being alive. It's our go-to clue.
But hold on, right away, that simple answer starts to fall apart. Think about a plant. At any given moment, you can't see it growing, but it's definitely alive. Or what about an animal sleeping so soundly that you can't even see its chest move? So our most obvious clue, it's already got some pretty big holes in it. The mystery is a little deeper than it looks. Okay, so if it's not just movement, what about the other usual suspects? Breathing? Well, that's a good one for us, but plants don't breathe with lungs. Growth? Sure, living things grow, but they can be alive without actively getting bigger every single second. And color? You know, someone might say a plant is alive because it's green, but what about all the plants with red or purple leaves? None of these are the one universal sign we're looking for. So yeah, it's becoming pretty clear. The things we can actually see with our own eyes, movement, breathing, growth, they're just not reliable enough. They're clues, for sure, but they aren't the definitive proof we need.
So if the answer isn't on the surface, that must mean we have to go deeper. What if the most important sign of life is happening on a scale that's completely invisible to us? What's the real secret going on inside all these organisms?
And here we have it. This is the answer. Professional biologists all agree. The true universal sign of life is molecular movement, a constant, invisible churning of molecules that is absolutely essential for life itself. This is happening inside that sleeping dog, inside that slow-growing plant, and yep, inside you right this very second.
And this isn't just some boring textbook definition. It has real-world consequences. Take viruses, for example. A virus on its own shows no molecular movement at all. It's totally inert. That is, until it infects a living cell. This very fact is why scientists are still debating whether viruses are truly alive or not. The dividing line is drawn right at this essential invisible movement. Okay, so we've found the what, it's molecular movement. But that just brings up an even bigger question. Why? Why is this constant, microscopic buzzing and whirring so absolutely vital for something to be considered alive? Well, it all comes down to structure. Living organisms are just masterpieces of organization. They've got tissues, and those are made of cells, and inside those cells are even smaller, highly organized parts. Everything has its place, everything has its function. Life is order. This brings us to the core conflict of, well, existence. On one side, you've got the incredible order of a living thing. On the other side, you've got the environment, which is constantly trying to break that order down. It's a fundamental law of the universe. Things just tend towards decay and disorder. The stakes in this battle could not be higher. If that internal order breaks down, if the whole structure falls apart, the organism simply stops being alive. It's as simple and as serious as that. So how does life fight back? With constant maintenance work. Living things have to continuously repair and maintain their own structures to fight off that breakdown. And since all these structures, from tissues all the way down to the tiniest parts of a cell, are made of molecules, that repair work has to happen at the molecular level. This means molecules must be moved around all the time to fix whatever is broken. And that means this invisible movement isn't random at all. It has a profound purpose. It's the engine of life's maintenance crew, working 24/7 to keep the entire structure from just falling apart. So that brings us to the verdict of our investigation. The defining characteristic of life is this constant, invisible molecular movement. Its whole job is to actively repair and maintain the highly organized structures of an organism. It's the fundamental, nonstop defense against the natural tendency toward decay. That is the true sign of life. But, of course, answering one question just leads to another, even more fascinating one. We know that life depends on this constant molecular repair. But what are these maintenance processes exactly? How do they even work? Well, that sounds like an investigation for another time. You know, what is the real difference between, say, a rock and a robin? It seems super obvious, right? One's alive, one's not. But what's the actual job description for being alive? What are the essential, non-negotiable tasks that something has to perform to get into the club? That's what we're going to break down today.
And it really all boils down to this one simple idea. Being alive is a full-time gig. There are no vacations, no weekends off. You can't just clock out. I mean, even when you're totally knocked out, fast asleep, your body is a buzzing factory of activity, working around the clock just to keep you, well, you. And there's an official name for this set of jobs. We call them life processes. You can think of them as the official rulebook for the factory of life. And the key thing is, it's not about doing just one of these things. It's about doing all of them, all at once, without ever stopping. So to really get a handle on this, let's go on a tour of the most amazing factory in the universe, a living body. We're going to check out the main maintenance job, see how the factory gets its fuel, how it makes its own power. We'll look at the internal transit system, and of course, every factory has to deal with its trash, so we'll look at waste management. All right, first stop on our tour. Let's head to the manager's office. We need to understand the big picture here, the maintenance job. What's the one fundamental problem that this whole incredibly complicated factory is designed to solve? Well, here's the thing. The universe has one simple rule. Everything tends to fall apart. It wants to break things down into simpler, messier states. And life is the ultimate rebel against that rule. It's this constant, active, energetic fight to hold itself together, to repair damage, and to just say nope to that natural tendency to break down. That is the core mission.
Okay, so if you're running a factory 24/7 and your only job is to fight off total collapse, what's the one thing you absolutely, positively cannot run out of? Power. Energy, right? You need a constant supply. And that brings us to the first real department on our factory floor. Welcome to step 1, getting fuel. Or, as we'll call it, the raw materials department. Because a factory can't run on hopes and dreams, and neither can a living thing. This whole process, we call it nutrition. And it's really just the simple but absolutely vital act of finding an energy source out there in the world, what we call food, and bringing it inside the factory. It's the main intake valve for the whole operation. And look, this fuel from the outside, it's everything. It's the juice that powers that constant maintenance we just talked about. And it's the actual raw material, the literal nuts and bolts for building new parts and for making repairs. And, it's kind of cool when you think about it. Because life on Earth is built from carbon, it just makes sense that most of our fuel sources are also carbon-based. Okay, so we've got all these raw materials piling up at the loading dock, but that's not enough. You can't run a complex machine on raw logs. You need processed lumber. You have to turn that raw fuel into usable power. So let's head over to the factory's power plant. And here's the problem the power plant has to solve. The fuel we get from the outside world is all over the place. An apple is nothing like a piece of steak. The body can't build 1,000 different types of engines for 1,000 different types of food. No way. It needs one single, uniform, standardized type of energy that every single cell in the body can use. And that conversion process, well, that's called respiration. And for animals like us, it requires a magic ingredient from the outside world, oxygen. Oxygen is what lets us take our food, crack it open, and efficiently release all the energy locked inside. So the production line looks pretty much like this. You bring in carbon-based food through nutrition. You bring in oxygen through respiration. Then a whole series of chemical reactions happens that creates that standardized energy source. But, and this is a big but, like any industrial process, this one creates waste. It makes trash. And we're going to come back to that in just a minute.
So we have fuel coming in, and we've got a power plant that's humming along making energy. But all of that is totally useless if you can't get the fuel to the plant and then get the energy out to all the different workers on the assembly line. Every good factory needs a logistics network, a delivery system.
And this is where things get really, really cool. You might be asking yourself, wait a second, why is this so complicated? If every single cell needs food and oxygen, why doesn't it just, grab it for itself from the outside world? This right here is the fundamental difference between simple life and complex life. See, if you're a single-celled organism, your entire body is touching the outside world. So yeah, you can just absorb what you need.
But for a complex creature like us, most of our cells are buried deep inside. A cell in your brain has no way to just reach out into the air and grab some oxygen. It's totally isolated. Simple diffusion just isn't going to cut it. So what's the solution? You have to build a dedicated transportation system, a superhighway that can pick up the food and oxygen from specialized locations, like your gut and your lungs, and deliver those supplies to every single cell no matter how deep inside it is. That's what our circulatory system is, and it's what makes complex life possible.
All right, our factory tour is almost over. We just have one last absolutely crucial department to visit, waste management. Because any factory that's actually doing work is going to produce trash, and the factory of life is no exception.
Remember that energy production line we talked about? Well, whenever you have chemical reactions breaking down food with oxygen to make energy, you're going to have stuff left over. You're going to have byproducts. It's just a fundamental consequence of getting work done.
And these aren't just harmless leftovers we're talking about. To the cells, these byproducts are totally useless. Even worse, if you let them build up, they can actually become toxic and dangerous. So you absolutely have to get them out. And that's where excretion comes in. This is the body's official trash collection service. And guess what? It uses that exact same transportation system, that same highway, to pick up all the waste from the cells and carry it to special organs that can process it and get it out of the body for good. So as we finish up our tour, here's maybe the most important takeaway of all. These aren't just 4 separate jobs that happen to be in the same building. They are one single, deeply interconnected system. You can't have a power plant if you don't have a fuel delivery system. You can't run the assembly line if trash is piling up everywhere. It all has to work together. So, a quick final recap of our factory tour. Nutrition, that's getting the raw materials. Respiration, that's the power plant generating energy. Transportation, that's the logistics network, the highways for supplies and for garbage. And excretion, that's the final waste disposal. All of them working together 24/7 to do the maintenance job of being alive. This factory model, this blueprint, it pretty much describes every single form of life we have ever discovered here on Earth. But that leaves us with a huge and kind of mind-bending question. Is this the only way to build a living thing? Or is it possible that somewhere else out there, in the unbelievable vastness of the universe, a totally different kind of factory is humming along, running on a set of rules that we can't even begin to imagine? Now that's something to think about.
You know, every single living thing on this planet, from the tiniest microbe all the way up to us, has the exact same problem to solve. How do you get energy? It's this universal challenge, but it turns out there are really only 2 answers. So today, we're going to dive into life's 2 brilliant strategies for survival, the fundamental ways everything, and I mean everything, powers itself.
But let's make this personal. Just stop for a second and think about this. Where does the energy for a single thought actually come from? Or for your heart to beat just once? It feels instant, like it comes from nowhere, almost like magic. But the real answer, well, it traces all the way back through this incredible chain of life that connects you to the very foundation of our planet. Because even right now, as you're sitting there, maybe thinking you're doing nothing at all, your body is like a bustling factory that never shuts down. I mean, cells are constantly repairing themselves, your body's building new proteins, it's fighting off chaos to maintain this incredible sense of order. And all of that work, it needs a constant stream of fuel. And that fuel comes from the food you eat. So right, this isn't just a human thing, this is a universal truth. Every single living organism out there shares this constant, nonstop need for fuel and raw materials. It is the central problem that all life everywhere has to solve just to exist.
Okay, so if everyone has the same problem, how do they solve it? Well, while the need for energy is the same for everybody, the ways they go about getting it are fundamentally different. In fact, you can basically split the entire living world into 2 huge, distinct camps.
And to really get our heads around this big split, we're going to use a really simple but powerful idea, the makers versus the takers. And these aren't just fun names. They perfectly describe the 2 core strategies for getting the energy you need to live.
So here's the difference, right here. On one side, you've got the makers. Their science name is autotrophs. These guys are the ultimate do-it-yourselfers. They create their own food from the absolute simplest non-living stuff around them. Then, on the other side, you've got the takers, or heterotrophs. They can't make their own food, so they have no choice but to get it by eating other living things.
So let's start with the makers. You can think of them as the world's master chefs. They can whip up these incredible, energy-packed meals from the most basic pantry ingredients you could ever imagine. All right, so the formal term is autotroph. And the key here is that they produce their own food, and they do it using simple inorganic materials. Inorganic is just a fancy way of saying stuff that isn't alive and never was. Think air, water, minerals. And just how simple is their shopping list? It's honestly kind of mind-blowing. They build everything they need from just two things: carbon dioxide, which they pull from the air, and water. That's it. Seriously. From those two incredibly basic ingredients, they build all the complex stuff that life is made of. So who are these master chefs? Well, the most obvious ones, of course, are all the green plants we see everywhere, from giant redwood trees down to the blades of grass in a lawn. But what's really cool is that they're not alone. Certain types of bacteria are also autotrophs, just quietly making their own food all around us without any of the fanfare. Okay, so if the autotrophs are the world's chefs, then that makes our second group the world's diners. They can't cook for themselves, so they have to eat what the chefs have made. So their formal name is heterotroph, and unlike the makers, they have to get their energy by using complex substances that they get from other organisms. They can't just start with CO2 and water. They need to eat something that was already alive.
Now this creates a pretty interesting challenge. When a heterotroph eats, it's taking in these big, complicated molecules, proteins, fats, carbs, from another living thing. It's kind of like trying to build a new Lego model using big, pre-built chunks from someone else's model. You can't just use them as they are. You've got to break them down into individual bricks first. So how do they do it? How does your body take something complex like a sandwich and turn it into the energy you need for a thought or a heartbeat? The answer is this amazing set of tools called enzymes. The best way to think of them is like tiny molecular scissors. Their entire job is to snip apart those big, complex food molecules into smaller, simpler pieces that the body can actually absorb and put to work. They make the whole process happen.
The whole process for us diners really breaks down into 3 simple steps. First, you consume the complex food. Step 2, you unleash those enzyme scissors to chop it all up into simple building blocks. And finally, step 3, your body absorbs those simple materials and uses them for energy and for growth.
And who are these diners, these takers? Well, it's a massive club. It includes all animals, and yep, that means us, and also fungi like mushrooms and molds. We are all fundamentally takers. And this brings us to the final and honestly the most crucial point of all. These two systems, the makers and the takers, they aren't just two separate teams playing their own games. They are deeply, fundamentally, and completely interconnected. And this leads us to the most important takeaway, which the source material just states perfectly. It says that the survival of the heterotrophs, that's the takers, depends entirely, whether you're talking directly or indirectly, on the autotrophs, the makers.
So let's put that in our simple terms. The takers absolutely cannot survive without the makers. Full stop. Every single meal a taker eats, it doesn't matter if it's a plant or if it's an animal that ate a plant, if you trace it back, the energy always comes from a maker that created it out of sunlight, water, and air.
So here it is, the big punchline, when we circle all the way back to that very first question we asked. The energy for everything we do, from running a marathon to having one single tiny thought, it all starts with them. It starts with the makers. And that leaves us with one final massive question to think about. We, the takers, are completely and totally dependent on the makers for every bit of energy we use. So, on a changing planet where those makers are under stress, what does that absolute dependency really mean for us? That's something to chew on. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.
Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're diving into one of nature's most incredible processes. It's the story of how plants don't just find their food, they literally make it completely from scratch.
I mean, just think about that for a second. Sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, right? But for plants, that's just a daily reality. It's the fundamental way they get all the energy they need to live, and this whole process has a very special name.
Okay, so here's the official term for that superpower. Autotrophic nutrition. It basically just means self-feeder. And the most famous method they use to do this is a little process that just so happens to power pretty much all life on our planet: photosynthesis.
To really wrap our heads around this, let's think about it this way. Imagine a plant is a master chef, a culinary genius. And its entire kitchen, well, the whole operation, is running right inside its leaves.
So if you were to zoom way in on one of those leaves, deep inside its cells, you'd find these tiny little green specks. Those are called chloroplasts. You can think of them as the special green cookware. This is exactly where all the magic happens.
All right, so every good chef needs ingredients, right? So what's on the shopping list for this incredible solar-powered meal? Turns out, a plant needs to grab 4 absolutely essential things from the world around it. You've got sunlight, carbon dioxide, or CO2, plain old water, and this special green pigment called chlorophyll. So let's take a quick look at where our little chef gets each of these crucial items.
Okay, first up is carbon dioxide. Plants basically breathe it in directly from the air. They have these tiny little pores on their leaves called stomata, and they're super smart. They can open and close to let that CO2 in right when it's needed for the recipe.
The next ingredient, water, is pretty straightforward. The plant's roots act like a built-in straw, sucking up water from the soil, and then transporting it all the way up the stem to the leaves, right where the kitchen is waiting.
And finally, we have chlorophyll. Now, you might think its only job is to make plants look green, but nope, it is so much more than that. This is the secret sauce. Its real job is to act like a tiny solar panel, catching the sun's rays and trapping that energy to kickstart the whole process.
Okay, so our ingredients are all gathered in the kitchen. Now for the fun part, the actual recipe. Let's break down how this all comes together. It really happens in 3 main steps.
The entire process boils down to these 3 main events: absorption, conversion, and reduction. So the plant absorbs energy, then it converts it into a usable form, and finally it uses that new energy to build its food. Let's see what that actually looks like.
So here's how it works. First, absorption. The chlorophyll soaks up that light energy. Second, conversion. That light energy gets transformed into chemical energy, and get this, it's powerful enough to literally split water molecules apart. And third, reduction. That chemical energy is used to change carbon dioxide into carbohydrates. And boom, that's the plant's food.
Okay, this all sounds great, but how do we know all this? How can we be so sure that these specific ingredients are absolutely necessary? Well, that's a fair question, and scientists have designed some really clever tests to prove it.
So first, how do we prove that green stuff, the chlorophyll, is vital? Well, scientists came up with a great experiment using a special kind of leaf, one that has both green and white patches on it. They took a plant with these special leaves and just let it sit in the sun for a while. When they tested one of the leaves for starch, which, remember, is the plant's food, they found it only in the green parts. The white parts that had no chlorophyll? Absolutely nothing. The conclusion was crystal clear. No chlorophyll, no food. Okay, so chlorophyll is a must. But what about carbon dioxide? To test its role, scientists set up another experiment, this time using 2 healthy plants sealed under separate glass bell jars. So they had these 2 plants under jars in the sun. But here's the twist. Inside one of the jars, they put a chemical that literally scrubs all the carbon dioxide out of the air. After a few hours, the results were definitive. The plant with CO2 made starch, but the one without it made 0. The entire recipe had failed without that key ingredient. So, the plant successfully follows the recipe and makes its food, these carbohydrates. But then what happens? Does it have to use all that energy right away? Not at all. Just like we might pack up leftovers, any carbohydrates the plant doesn't need right then and there are converted and stored as starch. This acts like an internal battery pack that the plant can draw energy from whenever it's needed. And you know, this might actually sound a little familiar, because our bodies do something very similar. When we eat, some of the extra energy from our food is also stored for later, just in a different form, called glycogen. It's a different molecule, sure, but it's the exact same brilliant strategy for saving energy. And that, really, is the essence of photosynthesis. It's this ancient, incredibly elegant process that turns sunlight, water, and thin air into the energy that powers our entire world. It kind of makes you wonder, as we look to the future, what's the most important lesson this natural recipe still holds for us today?
Okay, so we all have to eat. It's a basic fact of life. But have you ever really stopped to think about how incredibly weird and different eating can be across the natural world? Today, we're diving into nature's menu. And trust me, we're going to look at some dining strategies so strange you'll never see a mushroom the same way again.
I mean, really think about that for a second. A lion has teeth, claws, a whole system built for a very specific job. But a mushroom, it just sits there. And yet, they both have to get food to survive. How does that even work? Well, that simple question gets right to the heart of how life is designed to find energy.
There's a fancy scientific name for this whole concept: heterotrophic nutrition. It sounds complicated, I know, but it's actually super simple. Hetero just means other, and trophic is all about feeding. So it's just talking about any living thing that has to feed on other things because it can't make its own food, like plants do with photosynthesis. We're heterotrophs, a lion is a heterotroph, and yeah, so is a mushroom.
So here's the absolute key to understanding all of this. The strategy an organism uses to eat isn't just some random choice. Nope. It is perfectly sculpted by its environment, and more than anything, by what's actually available to eat. In other words, the menu dictates the diner. You can really boil it down to two pretty basic scenarios. First, is your food source just sitting there, not going anywhere, like grass? Well, if that's the case, you're going to need some specialized gear to get it and process it, kind of like a cow's super complex digestive system. But if your food is on the move, like a deer, you need a totally different set of tools. One's designed for hunting and capturing, just like a lion. So let's take a look at our first item on the menu, the decomposers. You can think of these guys as the ultimate recyclers of the natural world. Their strategy is literally the exact opposite of how we do things. Instead of putting food inside their bodies to digest it, they digest it externally. They release these powerful enzymes out into the world to break down dead organic stuff, and then they just absorb all the good nutrients. It's kind of like turning their entire environment into an external stomach. Wild, right? And you totally know these organisms. We're talking about all kinds of fungi. The mold that might grow on old bread in your kitchen, the yeast that helps make bread rise, and of course all the mushrooms you see out in a forest. Every single one of them is dining out by digesting their meals right where they find them. All right, on to our second menu item, and this one is going to feel way more familiar. Let's talk about the consumers. And spoiler alert, this group definitely includes us. This is our method. It's the classic approach. We take in whole food, an apple, a sandwich, whatever, and all the really complicated work of breaking it down and getting the nutrients happens inside our bodies, thanks to our specialized digestive systems. And for consumers, what's on the menu is completely determined by body design. What an animal can eat depends entirely on the physical tools it has. I mean, a lion simply cannot digest grass, and a cow isn't built to go hunting. Each body is a perfectly tuned machine for its very specific diet. And that includes our own. Okay, for our third and final and maybe the most cunning menu choice, we have the uninvited guests. These are the organisms that have figured out a way to get a meal without ever having to hunt for it or wait for it to decompose. This phrase pretty much sums up the entire parasitic strategy. These organisms get all their nutrition directly from another living plant or animal, which we call a host. But here's the really important part. Their goal is not to kill the host. A smart parasite knows you have to keep your food source alive for as long as possible. You don't want to shut down the restaurant, right? And this strategy is used by a massive variety of living things. You've got plants like Cascuta, which literally wraps itself around other plants and just steals their nutrients. And then you have animals like ticks, lice, leeches, and even internal parasites like tapeworms. They're all uninvited guests, dining on a living host. So we've looked at these three totally different ways of eating. What's the big takeaway here? What's the one single idea that connects all of them? Well, it's that adaptation is absolutely everything. So let's just recap real quick. We've seen the three core strategies. You've got the decomposers, who digest their food outside. You have the consumers, like us, who digest everything inside. And you have the parasites, who get their food from a living host. Three completely different game plans for solving the exact same problem, getting energy. And it's so important to remember that none of these methods is better than any other. Not at all. Each one is a brilliant, perfectly evolved solution for surviving in a very specific environment. Whether you're a mushroom, a lion, or a leech, every organism has perfected its own unique way of ordering from nature's incredible menu. Which, of course, leaves us with one last, kind of wild thought to chew on. We are consumers. Our bodies are designed to do one thing, eat and digest internally. But just imagine for a second, what if we could borrow a trick from one of those other menus? What would that even look like?
It really makes you appreciate the insane diversity of life out there and the very specific, incredible path our own bodies have taken. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of life's biggest challenges: how to get a meal. But forget about lions and sharks. We're going microscopic, looking at how the simplest living things solve this problem. And you'll see, their solutions are surprisingly clever. All right, let's kick this off with a puzzle, one that biology solved billions of years ago. Think about it. If you're just a single cell floating around, you've got no mouth, no teeth, no stomach, how on earth do you eat? It seems impossible, right? Well, the simplest answer is you just make your whole body the mouth. For those first life forms, their entire outer surface was their connection to the world. It's how they moved, how they sensed things, and yeah, how they grabbed a bite to eat whenever something tasty just floated by. And this right here, this brings us to a huge idea in biology. As things get more complex, they specialize. It's kind of like a small startup turning into a big company, right? Suddenly, you can't have everyone doing everything. You need a sales team, an engineering team. You get the picture. Life does the exact same thing. It creates specialized parts for specialized jobs. And what's wild is we're about to see this principle in action inside a single cell. Okay, so first up, let's meet our first case study, the incredible shape-shifting amoeba. This little guy is a total pro at making its entire body do all the heavy lifting. So an amoeba, it's pretty much just a tiny living blob. It has no fixed shape at all, and that's actually its superpower. It means literally any part of its surface can turn into a mouth whenever a snack happens to float by. Super convenient. Okay, before we see this in action, there's one key term you gotta know: the food vacuole. Just think of it like a little disposable stomach that the amoeba makes whenever it needs one. It's a pop-up kitchen where all the digestion happens. And here's how it all goes down. Just look at this. The amoeba has zero plan. It just senses some food nearby, and poof, it sprouts these temporary arms, these finger-like extensions that just reach out and wrap around the food particle. Then they seal up, trapping the food inside that little pop-up stomach, the food vacuole. Then the real work starts: digestion. Once it's sucked out all the good stuff, the cell it just scoots the vacuole over to the edge and spits out the trash. It's a completely improvised on-the-fly meal. So that's the amoeba's approach. Super flexible, just go with the flow. But what happens when a single cell gets a bit more structured? Let's meet our second organism, the paramecium. It's also just one cell, but believe me, its dinner plan is completely different. And boom, here's the key difference right off the bat. The amoeba is a flexible, do-it-all kind of organism. The paramecium, it's a specialist with a very specific structure. It's got a permanent shape, and get this, a dedicated spot just for eating. Now, this slipper-like shape isn't just for show. It completely changes how the paramecium lives. Because it has a fixed body, it has to have a permanent mouth. But that creates a problem, right? If you can't move your mouth to the food, what do? Well, you solve it with these things called cilia. Just picture thousands of tiny little hairs or oars covering the whole cell. But here's the cool part. They're not for chasing food. Nope, their job is way, way smarter than that. This is where it gets really genius. Instead of hunting for its food, the paramecium becomes a trapper. It beats all those thousands of cilia together to create a little current in the water, like a tiny whirlpool. And that whirlpool sucks in all the tasty bacteria and delivers them right to its front door, or, its mouth spot. It's an incredibly efficient way to eat. It makes the food come to it. So let's recap. We've got two single-celled organisms. We'd call both of them simple, but their strategies for getting a meal couldn't be more different. So what's the big takeaway here? This chart really breaks it down nicely. On one hand, you have the amoeba. No real shape, so it can eat anywhere on its body using those temporary arms. That's what we'd call low specialization. Then you've got the paramecium. It has a definite shape, a specific spot for eating, and it uses a special tool, the cilia, to get the job done. That's a much higher level of specialization. It's a clear step up. And this brings us right back to that big idea from the beginning. There's an undeniable link between how an organism is built, its structure, and what it can do, its function. The amoeba's blobby form allows it to be a flexible generalist, but the paramecium's rigid structure forces it to come up with a specialized, more efficient plan. It's a beautiful example of how, in biology, form and function go hand in hand.
You know, when you really think about it, the way something eats tells you so much about its complexity. Is it an all-in-one generalist or a creature with lots of specialized parts? It's like a window into its place on the evolutionary ladder. So I'll leave you with this to think about. If there's this much difference, this much creativity between two tiny single-celled organisms, just imagine the mind-blowing variety of strategies that have evolved across all of life, from an ant to a blue whale. And it all boils down to that one fundamental choice. Do you do everything, or do you get really, really good at one thing? Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going on this incredible journey, one that every single one of us takes multiple times a day, usually without even thinking about it. We're going to follow our food from that very first bite all the way through our bodies. So, let's dive in. Our whole trip takes place along this long, winding road called the alimentary canal. Just picture it as a long, specialized tube that runs right through you, starting at the mouth and going all the way to the other end. I mean, seriously, have you ever really stopped to think about it? You chew, you swallow, and then what? It all feels so automatic, but what's actually going on inside of you is this incredibly complex and, honestly, fascinating process. And this isn't just some simple pipe we're talking about. The alimentary canal is made up of all these different regions, and each one is highly specialized to do a very specific job. It's all designed to make sure you get every last bit of energy and every nutrient from the food you eat. All right, so here's our roadmap for the journey. We'll kick things off where it all begins, in the mouth. Then we'll travel down through the stomach, into those winding intestines, and follow it all the way to the final exit. Let's get going. First stop, the mouth. Now, a lot of people think digestion starts in the stomach, right? Nope, it actually kicks off the very second that food passes your lips. So, two key things are happening right away. First, there's the mechanical part. Your teeth are crushing the food into smaller, more manageable pieces. And at the exact same time, your mouth starts to water. That liquid, your saliva, isn't just there to make things less dry. It's our first chemical weapon in the whole digestive process. And here's the star player in that saliva, an enzyme called salivary amylase. Now, think of enzymes as these tiny biological catalysts. They're like little workers that just massively speed up chemical reactions. This one's specific job, to immediately start breaking down complex starches, like from bread or potatoes, into much simpler sugars. And you can actually see this in action. A simple experiment proves it. If you were to put some starch and saliva in one test tube, that enzyme gets to work, and boom, the starch starts breaking down. But in another tube with just starch and water, nothing happens. It just sits there. It's the perfect proof that your saliva is actively digesting your food before you even swallow. Okay, after a quick trip down the esophagus, our food lands in the stomach. Now, this is where the really heavy-duty breakdown begins, especially for the tough stuff, like proteins. The stomach is basically a muscular bag that churns your food around in this potent cocktail of digestive juices. You've got hydrochloric acid, which makes the environment super acidic. Then you have an enzyme called pepsin, which just loves that acidic setting and gets right to work digesting proteins. And, crucially, you have mucus. And that mucus is unbelievably important. I mean, without it, the powerful hydrochloric acid would literally start to digest the stomach wall itself. It's a perfect example of the delicate balancing act our bodies perform every day. The stomach has to be harsh enough to break down a steak, but not so harsh that it destroys itself in the process. And this probably sounds familiar, right? When you hear someone talking about having acidity or heartburn, it's often directly related to this system. It's what happens when that delicate balance gets thrown off, and the acid starts to irritate the lining of the stomach or even the esophagus. So, from the stomach, the partially digested food, it's more like a paste at this point, gets released in small spurts into the small intestine. Now, don't let the name small fool you. This is the longest part of the entire alimentary canal, and it's where the final, complete digestion of pretty much everything happens. And here's a cool little fact. The length of the small intestine actually varies depending on diet. Herbivores who eat really tough plant material like grass need a much, much longer small intestine to break down all that cellulose. Carnivores, on the other hand, eat meat, which is way easier to digest, so their small intestine is shorter. So the food arriving from the stomach is extremely acidic. The first thing the intestine has to do is neutralize it. That's job number one for bile, a juice that comes from the liver. Its second job is to tackle fats, and it acts exactly like dish soap on a greasy pan, breaking down big blobs of fat into tiny little droplets. That process is called emulsification.
Okay, so the acid is neutralized, the fats are all broken up into tiny droplets. Now it's time to send in the specialists from the pancreas. An enzyme called trypsin comes in to finish off any remaining proteins, while another one, lipase, specifically targets those tiny fat droplets that bile just created, breaking them down even further.
So at this point, all of our food has been broken down into its smallest possible building blocks. The final job of the small intestine is to absorb all of these precious nutrients and get them into our bloodstream so our body can actually use them. And here it is, the final result of all that hard work. Those complex carbohydrates are now simple glucose. The proteins have been converted into amino acids, and fats are now just fatty acids and glycerol. These are the final pieces of the puzzle, small enough to finally pass through the intestinal wall and be used by our cells for energy, growth, and repair. But how does the body absorb all this stuff so efficiently? Well, the secret lies in these incredible structures called villi. The entire inner lining of the small intestine is covered in millions and millions of these tiny finger-like projections. And the whole reason they exist is to drastically increase the surface area available for absorption. I mean, think about it. If the small intestine were just a smooth tube, most of the good stuff would just slide right on by. But thanks to the villi, it's like a huge, shaggy carpet that's perfectly designed to catch every last valuable nutrient. Finally, whatever is left over moves into the large intestine. Its main job is pretty simple: absorb most of the remaining water from the undigested food. Everything else is then formed into waste and, well, removed from the body. Now, before we finish up, I want to circle all the way back to our very first stop, the mouth, because that initial stage of digestion we talked about has another huge implication, and that's for our dental health. Tooth decay happens when the bacteria in our mouth feed on sugars, and in the process, they produce acid. Now, these bacteria and bits of food can form a sticky film on your teeth called plaque. The real problem is that the plaque acts like a shield, preventing your saliva from reaching the tooth surface to neutralize that acid. Over time, the acid just sits there and softens the tooth enamel, causing decay. It's a powerful reminder that brushing is all about scrubbing away that plaque shield before it can do its damage. So, from the enzymes in your saliva to the acid in your stomach and the incredible, brilliant architecture of your intestines, this sophisticated and powerful process unfolds inside you with every single bite you take. So the next time you sit down to eat, just think about that incredible journey. Does knowing what's happening on the inside change how you see the meal in front of you? Thanks for joining me.
All right, let's talk about something you're doing right now. Something you do about 20,000 times a day, usually without even thinking about it. Breathing. We're going to uncover the incredible science behind it, because trust me, it's way more than just moving air in and out of your lungs.
So, here's a weird question for you. What could possibly connect you, a fissionable, and a loaf of bread rising in the kitchen? I know, it sounds like the beginning of a bad joke, right? But the answer is this amazing process called respiration. It's the engine of life, and it's what we're going to break down today.
Okay, let's start with the absolute basics. We all know the simple version. We breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. But why? Why is that specific exchange so absolutely essential for us to stay alive?
And you know, you can actually prove this yourself with a super simple experiment. Remember in science class blowing through a straw into lime water? It gets all cloudy, right? Well, that cloudiness is the carbon dioxide from your breath reacting with the water. It's proof that your body is actively making CO2 as a waste product.
But it's not just about getting rid of waste. Think about what happens when things go a little wrong. You know that feeling, right? When you have to sprint for a bus and your legs just start to burn? That feeling is your muscle cells literally running out of oxygen. They have to switch to this emergency backup system to make energy. And that burning sensation, that's lactic acid, the byproduct of that desperate effort.
So that whole emergency backup thing, it's a huge clue that leads us to where the real action happens, inside ourselves. We're going to zoom way in now and see how our bodies turn food into fuel, and it turns out there's a major fork in the road.
No matter if you're human, a houseplant, or a tiny little bit of yeast, the energy journey always starts the exact same way. A sugar molecule, glucose, gets split right in half. This creates two smaller molecules called pyruvate. Now remember that name, pyruvate, because what happens to it next is everything.
So this pyruvate molecule comes to a fork in the road, and its fate hangs on one simple question: is there oxygen around? If the answer is yes, we get aerobic respiration. The pyruvate heads into the cell's powerhouses, the mitochondria, and gets broken down completely into CO2 and water. The energy payout here is huge. But if there's no oxygen, well, that's anaerobic respiration. In our muscles, the pyruvate becomes that lactic acid we talked about. In yeast, it becomes alcohol and the carbon dioxide bubbles that make bread rise. The bottom line? Anaerobic is a quick fix, but the energy you get from it is tiny in comparison.
So all this breaking down of glucose, it's not just random chaos. It's more like a controlled demolition. And the whole point is to release energy in a very specific way. That energy is used to build one of the most important molecules in all of life.
And here it is. Meet ATP. This molecule is the real star of the show. You can think of it as the actual energy currency of your cells. It's like cash. The whole point of respiration, with or without oxygen, is to make these ATP molecules.
And the real genius of ATP is how it stores that energy. See, instead of having a giant uncontrolled explosion of energy, your cell just needs to snap off one little piece of the ATP molecule. It's like cracking a glow stick. It releases a perfect, standardized, totally usable packet of energy every single time.
And this just shows you how incredibly useful that little energy packet is. ATP is like the ultimate rechargeable battery. It can power anything. It's what makes your muscles contract, it's what builds new proteins, it's what fires your nerve signals. Pretty much anything your body needs to do, ATP is paying the energy bill.
Okay, so we get it now. The name of the game is making ATP. And the best way to do that is with oxygen. Which leads to a really big problem for every living thing. How do you get that oxygen from out there in the world into your cells? Let's zoom out and check out the amazing solutions life has come up with.
Well, the challenge is different for everyone. Plants, for example, they breathe through these tiny little pores in their leaves. Fish have it way tougher. They have to constantly push water over their gills just to pull out the little bit of oxygen that's dissolved in it. And then you have us, land animals. We develop lungs to create this huge moist surface for gas exchange that's safely tucked away inside our bodies.
And this chart just puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? I mean, can you imagine having to take almost 100 breaths every minute just to get by? That's what a fish has to do. There's so much less oxygen available in water than in the air, so they have to work so much harder just to get the same fuel that we get with one easy, relaxed breath.
So, let's bring it all back home. After seeing all these different ways of solving the oxygen problem, you can really start to appreciate just how elegant and efficient our own breathing system is. It's an absolute marvel.
The journey a single breath takes is just incredible. It gets filtered and warmed up in your nose, travels down your throat through a pipe held open by cartilage rings, and then branches out inside your lungs like an upside-down tree. It ends in millions of these tiny balloon-like sacs called alveoli. And that is where the magic happens, where the oxygen finally meets your bloodstream.
So why go through all this trouble with blood and a circulatory system? Why can't oxygen just soak into our bodies? Well, get this. For a big creature like us, just letting oxygen diffuse on its own is way too slow. Someone actually calculated that it would take about 3 years for a single oxygen molecule to get from your lungs to your toes by diffusion alone. We need a superhighway.
And that superhighway is powered by our secret weapon, hemoglobin. This special molecule is packed into our red blood cells. Think of it as the world's best taxi service for oxygen. It grabs onto oxygen molecules in the lungs, holds on tight for the ride through the bloodstream, and then drops them off exactly where they're needed most. It is an amazing high-speed delivery service.
But, and this is a big but, this incredibly fine-tuned machine is delicate. Your airways are lined with these tiny little hairs called cilia that are constantly sweeping out dust and germs. Smoking just destroys them. And without that cleaning crew, all sorts of harmful stuff can get deep into the lungs, leading to infections, a chronic cough, and of course, lung cancer.
So the next time you take a breath, just for a second, think about everything that's happening. It's not just air. It's the fuel for trillions of tiny engines making ATP, powering literally everything you do. This process connects you to all life on this planet. This amazing machine of yours runs 24/7 without you ever having to think about it. It's an absolute masterpiece, and it's yours to protect.
Have you ever thought about your body as a massive, bustling city? I mean, it's got power plants, communication networks, and, you guessed it, a delivery service that literally never stops. And this explainer, we're jumping right into that nonstop delivery service, the amazing highway that is your circulatory system.
So, let's ask a really simple question. How does a single cell, way down in your big toe, get its share of that sandwich you just ate, or the oxygen you're breathing in right now? Well, the answer is this incredible, mind-boggling feat of biological engineering, and it's happening inside you every single second.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with what's actually being moved around. Then we'll meet the powerhouse pump, the heart that gets it all going. After that, we'll trace the massive network of tubes it all travels through. And finally, we'll check out how this whole system even has its own built-in repair crew.
Okay, so any good transport system needs three basic things, right? You need the stuff you're shipping, a pump to move it, and the roads to carry it. Let's kick things off with the cargo itself.
And that cargo, of course, is your blood. Think of the liquid part, the plasma, as the delivery truck. It's carrying all the food and nutrients, and on the way back, it's hauling away all the waste like carbon dioxide. And floating inside those trucks are these specialized little couriers, your red blood cells. Their one and only job is super critical. Grab onto oxygen and don't let go until it's delivered. But you know, all those delivery trucks and couriers wouldn't get very far without an engine, would they? They'd just be sitting there. So let's meet the incredibly powerful pump that sits right at the heart of it all.
And here it is, the heart. And get this, it's only about the size of your own clenched fist. Seriously. But don't let that small size fool you for a second. This relentless muscle pumps something like 2,000 gallons of blood every single day. That's just wild.
So how does this thing actually work? Well, just think of it as a two-part journey. First, fresh, oxygen-rich blood comes in from the lungs and enters the left side of the heart. From there, the super powerful left ventricle gives it a massive push, sending it out to your entire body. After it drops off all that oxygen, that used blood comes all the way back to the right side of the heart. And then, the right ventricle sends it right back to the lungs to get reoxygenated and start the trip all over again. And these tiny little valves at each step, they act like perfect one-way doors, making sure the blood never ever flows backward. The absolute key to this whole operation is separation. The left side only handles fresh, oxygenated blood, and the right side only handles the used blood that's full of waste. This strict divide is what makes our oxygen delivery so incredibly efficient. And notice how the left side's walls are thicker and more muscular? Well, that's because it has the way tougher job. Pumping blood to the lungs next door is like a local delivery, but pumping it to your entire body, that's a cross-country haul, and it needs more muscle.
This whole amazing setup has a name. It's called double circulation, and all it means is that for every single trip around your body, blood has to pass through the heart twice. It's this two-stop system that makes our oxygen supply so efficient, which is exactly what high-energy, warm-blooded animals like us need to survive and thrive.
Okay, so we've got the cargo, the blood, we've got the pump, the heart. Now let's explore the incredible network of highways, main roads, and tiny little side streets that this blood travels on. So there are basically three main types of roads. Think of your arteries as the major superhighways. They carry blood away from the heart, so their walls have to be thick and elastic to handle that high-pressure traffic right after a big pump. The veins are more like the lower-pressure roads, bringing all the blood back towards the heart. And they have these cool little valves to keep traffic from sliding backward. And the capillaries? Oh, they're the tiny little neighborhood streets, so small that they're only one cell thick. This is where the real work happens, where the actual deliveries of oxygen and nutrients get made right to your cell's front doors.
You've definitely seen these numbers before, right? At the doctor's office, on that cuff they wrap around your arm. This is what's considered normal blood pressure. But what do those two numbers actually mean? It's pretty straightforward, actually. The top number, the systolic, is the peak pressure. It's the force during the big push when your heart contracts and sends blood rushing out. The bottom number, the diastolic, is the resting pressure in your arteries when the heart relaxes between beats. So it's basically the push and the pause, and together they give a fantastic snapshot of how your whole system is doing.
Now, a system this amazing, running 24/7 with this much pressure and this much traffic, you just know it needs a top-notch maintenance and repair crew. So let's take a look at how the body protects this absolutely vital network.
Yeah, I mean, what happens when this perfectly closed system springs a leak? A simple paper cut, a scraped knee, suddenly you're losing blood and the pressure in the whole system could drop. The entire delivery network is at risk. So how does the body's emergency service respond to a call like that?
It calls in the special ops team, platelets. These are these tiny little cell fragments,
just floating around in your blood, basically on standby. The moment a blood vessel is damaged, they get the signal, they rush to the site, and they immediately start building a patch, a blood clot, to plug the leak, stop the bleeding, and keep the whole system running smoothly. It's amazing.
But hold on, there's actually a second parallel system running alongside the main highway. It's the lymphatic system. You see, as blood makes its deliveries down in those tiny capillaries, a little bit of the plasma fluid leaks out into the surrounding tissue. The lymphatic system acts like a super efficient drainage network, collecting all this excess fluid, which we now call lymph, and returning it safely back to the bloodstream. It's like this unseen partner that keeps everything perfectly balanced.
So when you think about it, from that fist-sized pump to the microscopic repair crew, your circulatory system is just this incredible, non-stop, fully automated masterpiece. It makes sure every single one of your trillions of cells gets exactly what it needs every moment of the day. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other incredible, invisible systems are humming away inside you right now just to keep you going?
Have you ever just, looked at a huge tree and wondered, how in the world does it drink? No mouth, no heart to pump anything, yet it moves water hundreds of feet into the air. Well, today we're going to dive into the secret, bustling world inside plants and uncover the incredible plumbing that lets them defy gravity. So let's just start with this puzzle, because it's one that has fascinated scientists for centuries. A single towering redwood tree can lift hundreds of gallons of water. We're talking multiple bathtubs full, all the way to its top every single day. How does it pull off this incredible feat without a single moving part? No pump, nothing like our heart. That's the mystery we're cracking today. You see, for a small plant like a little blade of grass, life is pretty simple. Water and nutrients can just kind of seep from one cell to the next. It's a process called diffusion. But for a tall tree, well, that's a whole different ballgame. Diffusion would be impossibly slow. This is the plant's big problem, the challenge of distance. Yeah, seriously, imagine trying to pass a tiny bucket of water hand to hand all the way up a skyscraper. It just wouldn't work, right? Diffusion is way too slow to get the raw materials from the soil up to the leaves, and it's definitely too slow to send the energy made in those leaves all the way back down to the roots. To solve this, plants evolved a brilliant transportation system with two totally distinct pathways. Okay, so let's jump into the first pathway. This is the water elevator. It's a specialized network called the xylem, and its whole job is to get water and minerals from the ground up. The best way to think about the xylem is like a super tight bundle of microscopic hollow straws. These straws are actually made of dead cells called vessels and tracheids, and they're all interconnected, forming this one unbroken pipeline that runs from the tiniest little root hair all the way to the tip of the highest leaf. The whole journey starts with this really clever trick down in the roots. The root cells, they actively use energy to pull mineral ions in from the soil. This makes the inside of the root kind of saltier than the soil around it. And, well, nature hates an imbalance. So water just naturally flows from the soil into the root to try and even things out. This creates a slow but steady push from below. Now, this little push, it's called root pressure, and it's important, especially at night. It gets the water column moving up. But it's a gentle push, not some powerful gush. It can only move water up a few feet tops. So if the push from the bottom is that weak, there has to be an incredibly powerful pull coming from the top. And that brings us to the real engine of this whole operation. This is nature's silent, solar-powered suction pump. It's a process called transpiration. So, in simple terms, transpiration is just the plant breathing out water vapor. You've got these tiny little pores on the leaves called stomata. They open up to let carbon dioxide in for photosynthesis, but when they do, water vapor inevitably escapes out into the air. You can actually see this happen with a super simple experiment. If you put a plastic bag over a plant, you'll start to see condensation, little water droplets forming. That's the water vapor coming out of the leaves. Now, if you do the same thing with just a plain old stick in a pot, nothing. This shows you clear as day that the water is actively coming from the plant itself. So here's the magic. As each little water molecule evaporates from a leaf, it actually pulls on the molecule right behind it in that xylem tube, because water molecules love to stick together. This creates this incredible tension, a continuous suction that literally pulls the entire column of water all the way up from the roots. During the day, this transpiration pull is the main driving force, for sure. Okay, so the water has made it to the leaves. Photosynthesis can happen, awesome. But what happens to the food, the sugar that the plant creates?
Well, now we have to look at the plant's food delivery service. This process is called translocation, and it's a mission-critical job. It's all about moving those energy-rich sugars like sucrose from the leaves where they're made, we call that the source, to any part of the plant that needs energy to live and grow, like the roots or fruit or new buds. We call those the sinks.
And the highway for this food delivery is our second system, the phloem. Now, if the xylem was a one-way street going up, the phloem is a two-way superhighway. It's made of living cells, sieve tubes, and companion cells that work together to move the food wherever the plant needs it to go. And here's the absolute key difference. Water movement in the xylem is passive, right? It's just driven by the physics of evaporation. But moving sugar in the phloem, that's an active process. The plant has to spend energy in the form of ATP to pump the sucrose into the phloem. This creates a high-pressure zone that then pushes the sugary sap towards any areas of lower pressure wherever it's needed.
So what we have are two totally distinct, highly sophisticated systems working right next to each other. Let's put them side by side and just see how their strategies compare. So check this out. Xylem's cargo is water and minerals, and it only goes one way, up. The driving force is just physics. Phloem, on the other hand, is moving sugar, amino acids, and it goes both up and down. And it's driven by active transport. It costs the plant energy. It's just a beautiful and incredibly efficient division of labor.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's really the elegant efficiency of this design. Plants solved a massive engineering problem by creating two separate, specialized plumbing systems. You've got a passive, high-volume water pipe going up and an active, demand-driven food delivery service going everywhere else. And that kind of leaves us with a fascinating final thought. This silent, solar-powered system is an absolute masterpiece of natural engineering that just works flawlessly in every tree, every single day. It really makes you wonder, if we could truly understand and copy this kind of silent, efficient transport, what kinds of problems could we solve? It's a masterclass in design just waiting for us.
Today, we're going to talk about something that every single living thing on this planet has to do, and that's get rid of waste. I mean, it's a challenge that life has been solving for billions of years, from the teeniest microbe to the biggest whale. So let's dive into how they pull it off.
It's a great question, right? How does life take out the trash? It's happening inside you right now and all around you, all the time. Think about it. Just like in your own home, if you let the trash pile up, things get messy, fast. Well, inside a living thing, it gets downright dangerous.
And this isn't just a problem for some of us, it's a universal one. Every living organism is kind of like a tiny, bustling factory. And you know what factories create, right? Waste. All that biological machinery produces stuff that needs to be dealt with.
Now you might be thinking, oh, waste, like the carbon dioxide we breathe out? And yeah, that's part of it. But that's just scratching the surface. The body's other activities, all those metabolic processes, they create totally different and frankly much more harmful kinds of waste. The real issue comes from the hidden waste, the stuff generated by all those chemical reactions that keep us going. We're talking mostly about nitrogenous materials. And here's the kicker. If these things build up, they become toxic. So getting rid of them isn't optional. It's absolutely essential for survival.
So this super important cleanup process isn't just, taking out the trash. In biology, it has a proper name. Let's make sure we're all on the same page with the terminology.
And there you have it, excretion. It's the biological process that is all about removing these harmful metabolic wastes from the body. Simple as that. A clear, direct definition for an incredibly vital job.
Okay, and this is where it gets really fascinating. Life is just so creative. When faced with the exact same problem, how to get rid of toxic gunk, different kinds of organisms have evolved completely different ways to solve it.
So let's start with the most basic strategy out there, the elegant solution that the simplest forms of life came up with.
So, if you're just one single cell, maybe an amoeba floating around in a pond, you've got a pretty sweet setup. Your solution is called simple diffusion. It's totally passive, it's direct, and you don't need any special equipment at all.
The way it works is just beautiful in its simplicity. First, that nitrogenous waste starts to build up inside the cell. Then, once the concentration inside is higher than outside, the waste just passes right through the cell's outer surface. And boom, it's released into the water. Job done. That simple method is perfect if your whole body is touching the outside world. But what about us? What about a creature made of trillions of cells all packed together? I mean, most of our cells are buried deep inside, nowhere near the surface. So how on earth do they get their trash out?
To solve that problem, complex organisms had to seriously level up their whole waste disposal game. Let's check out how they pulled off this massive multicellular upgrade.
Right. So for an organism made of trillions of cells, simple diffusion just won't cut it. No way. A cell deep inside your brain can't just push its waste out and hope it finds its way to the skin. The journey is way, way too far. A much more sophisticated system was needed.
And here it is, life's brilliant upgrade. Complex organisms evolved entire specialized organs that are dedicated to doing this one single job. We're talking about things like our kidneys. These organs are like a super advanced centralized waste collection system for the whole body.
So you can really see the two different game plans here when you put them side by side. On one hand, unicellular life uses that direct passive method, simple diffusion. But on the other hand, complex life developed these active specialized organs, two totally different evolutionary paths to solve the exact same problem, survival. And that really brings us to the core takeaway, which is summed up perfectly in this quote from our source material. Different organisms use varied strategies to do this. That's the whole story right there. The problem of waste is universal, but the solutions are incredibly diverse, custom-built by evolution to fit the organism.
And of course, this just opens up a whole new can of worms, doesn't it? We know complex life needs these specialized organs, but what are they? How do our kidneys actually work? Are there other organs involved? Well, that's the next fascinating step in understanding life's ultimate cleanup crew.
Hey there, and welcome. Have you ever stopped to wonder how your body, well, takes out its own trash? It's this incredibly complex, non-stop process that keeps us healthy every single moment of the day. So today, we're going to take a deep dive into the body's ultimate cleanup crew, the excretory system.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll meet the cleanup crew itself. Then we're going to zoom right into the kidney's powerful engine room. After that, we'll explore what happens when that engine fails and check out the amazing tech behind the artificial kidney. And we'll wrap up with the ultimate solution, what it means to get a second chance at life.
All right, first up, let's get to know the dedicated sanitation department that's working 24/7 inside every single one of us. This is the excretory system, and its #1 job is to take out the garbage. You know, it's a question we don't really think about much, is it? But the answer is just fascinating. Your body is constantly making waste products just by, living and breathing. And all that stuff has to go somewhere. So how does it all get collected and kicked out? Well, it all follows a surprisingly simple path. It starts with a pair of kidneys, kind of tucked away in your abdomen on either side of your backbone. They're the ones producing urine. That urine then travels down 2 little tubes called ureters and into the urinary bladder, which is basically a holding tank. And finally, when the time is right, it's released through the urethra. Simple, right? But so effective. So that's the big picture plumbing of the system. But now let's zoom way in. Let's look inside the microscopic engine that makes this whole thing run, the kidney itself. And the real hero of our story is this tiny structure called a nephron. Each of your kidneys is packed with a huge number of these things. Just think of them as millions of little individual filtering stations. Each one is basically just a tiny bundle of super thin blood capillaries hooked up to a little collecting tube. This is where all the magic happens. Now, to really get what the kidneys are doing, it helps to think about another filter we all know, our lungs, right? We all know our lungs work to pull carbon dioxide out of our blood. Well, the kidneys do a really similar job, but they're targeting a different kind of waste, specifically nitrogenous waste, stuff like urea and uric acid. Both are absolutely vital filters, they just have different missions. So how much filtering are we actually talking about here? Okay, get ready for this number. In a healthy adult, the kidneys process an initial filtrate of about 180 liters every single day. That is enough liquid to fill a pretty big bathtub. But hang on a second. We definitely don't get rid of 180 liters of urine a day. Not even close. The amount that actually leaves our body is only about 1 to 2 liters. So something's not adding up here. And this brings up a fantastic question, right? If this incredible filter is pulling 180 liters of fluid from your blood, but only a tiny little fraction of that actually leaves your body, where in the world does the other 99% of it go? And here is the absolutely brilliant answer: reabsorption. See, as all that filtrate is flowing through the nephron's little tube, your body's being incredibly smart. It selectively reaches in and pulls back all the good stuff it wants to keep: water, glucose, amino acids, important salts. It's like the ultimate recycling program, leaving only the concentrated junk behind. Okay, so this amazing system is great when it's working. But this brings us to a really critical question. What happens when these natural filters fail? Well, that's where medical technology steps in with a truly life-saving device.
Unfortunately, a few things can cause the kidneys to slow down or even stop working altogether. Things like serious infections, a major injury, or even just restricted blood flow to the kidneys can cause a dangerous buildup of waste in the body, and if that's not treated, it can be fatal.
This is where a process called hemodialysis comes in, using what we call an artificial kidney. Here's basically how it works. First, the patient's blood is drawn out and sent through a bunch of tubes with special linings. Second, those tubes are sitting in a special cleaning fluid, and all the waste products from the blood naturally seep out into that fluid. And finally, the newly purified blood is pumped right back into the patient. And this right here shows the single biggest difference. An artificial kidney is incredible at filtration and waste removal, just like a natural one. But look at that last row. Notice what's missing. There is no reabsorption. The machine can't selectively pull back all those useful things like a healthy kidney can. It's an absolute lifesaver, but it's not a perfect copy. So while dialysis is a crucial treatment, it's often a bridge, a temporary fix, on the way to the ultimate solution for kidney failure. And that solution happens to be one of the most profound gifts that one person can ever give to another.
And we're not just talking about kidneys either. Organ transplantation can replace a whole range of organs and tissues that are failed. I mean, look at this list. From hearts and lungs to corneas and bone marrow, the impact is just huge.
And here's something really important for everyone to know. A donor can be anyone. It doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter what your gender is. And while most organ donations happen after a donor has passed away, some organs, like a single kidney or even part of a liver, can actually be donated while the donor is still alive.
When you boil it all down, it really comes back to this. Organ donation is, at its very core, a generous act. It's the decision to give an organ to someone whose own has failed, completely transforming and sometimes even saving their life. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. From that tiny microscopic nephron working tirelessly inside you right now, to the incredible technology of dialysis, all the way to the profound generosity of a donor, it's all in service of one thing. So what does it truly mean to give someone the gift of life?
Hello and welcome. Today we're diving into a question that, well, you've probably never even thought to ask. How in the world do plants take out their trash? I mean, they're just sitting there, right? But they have to manage waste just like every other living thing.
But seriously, just think about it for a second. They can't exactly wheel a bin to the curb. So what happens to all their metabolic byproducts? The answer is, honestly, it's way cooler than you'd think. And it's completely different from how we animals handle things. Okay, let's get into it.
So, here's the first big thing you gotta understand. It's really a tale of two completely different systems. For us animals, our strategy is active. We move, we find a place, we, get rid of the waste. But plants, they're stuck. They can't go anywhere. So they had to evolve this entirely different passive toolkit. And this is where it gets really ingenious.
To really wrap your head around this, you almost have to think of it as a totally alien system. It's so unlike our own biology that it kind of forces you to look at life in a whole new way. So, let's unpack this very unique toolkit they've got.
It turns out plants have a whole bunch of tricks up their sleeve. They've got ways to deal with excess gases and water. They can lock waste up inside their own cells or even entomb it in dead parts of their body. And of course, they can just drop it, literally, by shedding leaves. They can even push waste out into the soil. Let's break these down.
All right, first up, we have to start with the most mind-blowing one of all, what I'm calling the oxygen paradox. This one idea completely flips our entire perspective on what waste even means. Just let this sink in. This is a key idea from our source material. The very gas that we and almost all other animals need to live, the oxygen we're breathing right now, is for a plant basically just exhaust. It's a leftover they need to get rid of. Think about it from the plant's point of view.
It's busy doing photosynthesis. It sucks in carbon dioxide, uses sunlight for energy, and what's left over from that chemical reaction? Oxygen. It doesn't need all that oxygen, so out it goes. Our planet's greatest treasure is literally a plant's trash. Wild.
Okay, but what about waste that isn't a gas? You know, the nasty solid or liquid stuff. If you can't just release it into the air, you've got to find a place to put it. And this brings us to some of nature's most clever storage solutions.
Let's start with their own internal storage locker. Believe it or not, pretty much every plant cell has one, and it's the perfect place to just stash away unwanted stuff. So these little lockers are actually called cellular vacuoles. They're basically these little membrane-bound bags inside the cell. And yeah, they hold useful things like water and nutrients, but they're also a primary dumping ground for waste products, safely tucking them away where they can't cause any harm to the rest of the cell.
All right, but what if you've got waste that's a bit too gnarly for just a little storage locker? Well, plants have an even more hardcore solution: the living tomb. I know, it sounds traumatic, but it's actually a pretty perfect description.
So here's how this works. Large parts of a plant, like the heartwood of a tree for instance, are actually made of dead cells. They're structurally sound, but not metabolically active. Plants take advantage of this by pumping waste products, things like those sticky resins and gums, into these dead cells, basically entombing the waste forever. Old xylem tissue is a classic spot for this.
Now, storing waste is one thing, but getting rid of it entirely is, of course, even better. And this brings us to the ultimate plant strategy of just letting it all go.
And they have this beautiful, simple three-step process. Step 1, the plant actively moves waste products into its leaves. Step 2, the leaves basically become little disposable trash bags. And Step 3, the plant just drops the leaf. All that accumulated waste is gone in one elegant move. It's brilliant.
Of course, it's not just solid junk. Plants also have to deal with excess water. So what do? They essentially exhale it. It's a process called transpiration, where water vapor is released from their leaves. It's kind of like their version of sweating, and it keeps everything in perfect balance.
So, we've seen them release waste into the air, store it inside themselves, and drop it onto the ground. But there's one more method, and it's maybe the most direct of all: just giving it right back to the soil.
That's right, some plants can actually excrete certain waste substances directly out of their roots and into the soil around them. It's just another way of offloading stuff they don't want, completing this really fascinating cycle with their immediate environment.
So, to just quickly recap here, plants get rid of waste by releasing oxygen, exhaling water vapor, hiding junk in cellular vacuoles, entombing toxins in dead tissue, using their leaves as disposable trash bags, and even secreting waste into the ground. When you see it all laid out, it's just an incredibly diverse and efficient system.
And that kind of leaves us with one final big thought. In the plant world, there's no such thing as waste in the way we think about it. Their biggest byproduct, oxygen, is the literal foundation for almost all animal life. The leaves they drop go on to enrich the soil. It's a perfect closed-loop system. So if a plant's trash is quite literally our planet's treasure, what can we learn from their incredibly elegant and sustainable example?